Good morning and welcome to yet another Micrographics Fusion 360 webinar. I'm your host, Carl van Rooyen. I'll be taking you through the webinar today. And on today's topic within Fusion 360 is the Fusion 360 configurations workspace, or should I say feature, that has been brought in within the last major update in Fusion. So without any further delays, let's move on to the introduction, or should I say the agenda. For today's webinar, on our agenda, we are going to go through a quick introduction before diving into how configurations works. The main part of configurations in Fusion 360 is the configuration tables. So we'll go through what the configuration table is, how it works. Then we'll move on to creating configured designs, how that whole process of creating the configured design will work. And then once you've created a configured design, what do you do with it? How can you work with that design outside of the design workspace? So we'll look at configurations outside of design. We'll then close off with a summary and any questions and answers at the end of the webinar. If you do have any questions, feel free to post in the live chat on the stream, and I'll keep an eye on that and answer any of those questions as they come up. So let's move on to the introduction. So if you are a design company that creates multiple design variations of a product, as an example on the right hand side here, just a demo set that I created for this webinar, a set of headphones. So let's take that as the example. You may have multiple variations of a headset. Maybe you have your entry level, your mid-range, and you have your pro level headsets that you need to design around, and they share a lot of components, they share a lot of design similarities. And so as you're going through the design process, you may need to take existing parts and modify their dimensions. You may need to modify the shape slightly, and so you end up with a lot of similar components that are reused within a design, or there are small changes made to those components within a design. Your design may have component counts that change. I know in Autodesk's material for design configurations, they have a boring head for mining, and they change the number of teeth on the boring head dependent on the type of material to be mined or to be drilled by the boring head. So you may have assemblies where the component counts within the assembly change. Or could quite simply be where the component dimensions are changing. An example here with the headphones is the diameter of the speaker can be switched out, or the speaker type can be switched out. And if you go with a smaller speaker, the ear cup can be smaller as well. So there'll be those dimensional changes that are driven. So if you're designing with components like that, this is something that you could consider bringing into your workflow. Also, if you have customers with, or if you provide customization options to your customer, you can have a predetermined table where you can then go through and select the customization options for the customer. Now, typically, if you are dealing with these scenarios, it'll create many different files that you have to manage. If you want to change out the speaker type and the ear cup and the foam that's related to that, the padding, you've got to switch out all of these different components, take out the smaller components, put in bigger components if you upgrade the speakers. And so this creates many files that you have to manage within your data panel or your Fusion 360 cloud storage. Once again, this can create multiple assemblies, or you may need to create multiple assemblies to cover your different design variations. And then from there, multiple drawings. And so you've got to create all of those different drawings for the different variations. And configurations will help to streamline this process, allow you to bring all of these changes into much fewer documents to allow for configuration of the designs and changing between different options within a design. So we can see on the right hand side here, this example of the headphones, we've got on the left hand side, let's say a much more deluxe or pro level headphone. It's got the wider band over the top of the head. You can see the material there is carbon fiber or carbon fiber look, maybe it gives it a bit of a premium feel. The cushioning on the ears is a lot thicker. And then on the right hand side, we have a sort of more mid-range, maybe it's got the same size speakers, but the headband isn't so wide. The cushioning isn't as thick isn't as plush as the Pro model. And you'd be able to switch between the different configurations and have those different components change in size or switch out as needed. So how does this all work? How do we actually set up the configuration? And this is where the configuration table comes in. This is sort of the lifeblood of configurations within Fusion 360. And the table, we've got an example on the right hand side here, is broken up into the main configuration table that shows you your configurations that are available for the design. And then below that, I have, in this case, 3 theme tables, and those theme tables can link back into the main table. So let's have a look at the first section, the main configuration table. This table here lists your, as I said, your main configurations. These are the configurations that you would choose between. So in the example of the headphones, I've got entry level, mid-range, and pro. So those are the 3 configured designs. So, depending on your preference or your budget, you can go between those 3 and have a configured headphone set for that specific, let's say, level that you choose. Now, within the main configuration table, mine shows configurations 3. Like I said, we've got entry level, mid-range, and pro. And then to the right of that, those are the lists of features or parameters to change. And in this case, those 3 columns there, speaker size, comfort, and appearance, are linked to the theme tables in the bottom. So you can either have your theme table columns, or you can have features and parameter, or even appearance and physical material columns in the main table columns. So this allows you to select or input the different changes for each configuration. So let's say with mid-range, we can see on the mid-range, the theme is choosing a 50mm speaker size on the speaker size theme. For comfort, we're choosing standard comfort for the comfort theme, and for the appearance, we've chosen red dahlia, and that would choose the corresponding row in the theme table at the bottom. So now if we look at the theme tables, we'll see a little bit more information in the theme tables. Each theme table has a name, so we'll see there's speaker size, comfort, and appearance themes. And the number there next to the title shows you how many variations there are within that table. So in the speaker size, we've got 2 different options. We've got a 40mm driver or a 50mm driver. And then the columns component, there's 2 component columns. If we expanded those columns out, we would see that they are the 40mm and 50mm driver components or speaker components for that design. And we are suppressing or unsuppressing as needed. And then we have some parameters: ear cup diameter, speaker diameter, another ear cup, and then ear pad width. And we can see that those values, those parameters, are being changed depending on what size speaker is being used. And then we can expand that downwards. Comfort, that's got to do with the thickness of the foam with around this design. So we can see we have a plush and a standard option. And so you continue down through your different theme tables. We've got the different options with regards to the 3 different themes. And we can see in the table at the top, coming back up to the main configuration, each of those themes would have a drop down. So for the appearance, we could go to entry level, double click on the shades of, that's a shades of blue, and we could actually change the entry level to red dahlia if we wanted to, or to carbon black if we wanted to have a black appearance there for that. So we can quite easily populate the theme tables and adjust the values as required. So the theme tables, in a nutshell, allow you to group multiple changes that are affected by one configuration change. In other words, we can change from a 50mm speaker to a 40, but that requires changes to different components and different parameters within the design. And we can see, obviously, multiple theme tables can be created and modified as needed. Now, just as another example here, this is one from Autodesk's material. They have a speaker, a subwoofer, which in the main table at the top allows you to go through the different configurations for the speaker size, anywhere from 6" up to 16". And you will see to the right of that, there are various themes that are linked. So we have the speaker size, and that is the first theme table we see open at the bottom there. And if the speaker size changes, we can see that as we go from a 6" up to a bigger speaker, the magnet count increases, the magnet thickness in this case stays the same, but the diameter increases. So we can see that we can adjust the values for that speaker component, for that subwoofer, depending on the size that's chosen. And so it continues with, in this case, they've got power handling, physical material requirements, you know, is it a lightweight or a heavyweight or middleweight design? Maybe for its application, if it's going to be an aircraft, you want lighter weight materials, but they might be more expensive. So we've got the different themed options available there. And then lastly, once you have created your configured design, your main configuration table configurations, in my case here I had the three, the entry level, mid-range and pro, those are shown within your model browser. So just below document settings in your model browser, you'll have a drop down for your configured design. You can click the drop down and you would have the list of configurations available there. So these are what are shown in your main configuration table. So there we can see entry level, mid-range and pro. And so you can switch your design between those, in this case, those three, quite quickly and easily on the drop down. So how do we go and create these configured designs? Well, your configured designs can be created using the multi-body design workflow, where all of your components are housed completely inside of a single design file. Or you can use distributed designs. So on the left hand side, you have the image on the left. That is a multi-body component. All the components for the design are housed within one design file for the headset. The only thing that is brought in is, as a distributed item, is the speaker. Basically downloaded a 50 and a 40mm speaker model and just pulled that in and added it. And then on the right hand side, we've got the same multi-body design file that has been inserted into a distributed design along with a base or a stand for the headphones. So we have the distributed design, which can be configured as required. So typically you would follow your same workflow. So your current workflow, you will follow that workflow as usual, but you will then work in the configurations into that design file. So you will basically integrate the configurations workflow into your existing workflow. Not much needs to change. So looking more specifically at multi-body design, the process here, the only thing that really changes is as you design, you're still going to design your components in place using bodies or components and then converting, let's say, bodies to components as required. But you do need to design with flexibility in mind. If you're a designer that is used to designing with parameters and you go to the parameter table and update the parameter table to update your design, then this should be a comfortable transition for you. Essentially, you're using the same process. You're just making sure that when you make your changes, in this case those values are changing in the configuration table, your design updates accordingly. So you need to make sure that your design is flexible. I actually ran into issues with the design process of the band for this headphone, trying to create that cutout. Just something I've noticed with Fusion, and I had to work around it a little bit within the design workflow there. Nothing major, just something I've noticed in the past with Fusion 360, and I was trying to use surface modeling for that. But essentially, in a nutshell, what you want to do is, as you work, you want to rename any dimensions and features that you want to configure. Those names for the dimensions and features are what are displayed in the table, in the configuration table. So if I jump back here a couple of slides, we see the magnet count. That could be a value for a pattern. So that could be the count, the number of objects in the pattern. And so magnet count there would be the actual name of the parameter or the value put into that field. Magnet diameter, obviously a diameter dimension within the drawing, and that dimension is called magnet diameter. So as you design, you want to rename your dimensions and features so that they display correctly within the table. You can, however, rename the dimension directly in the table. So if you had a D4 column as your dimension 4 in the table, you can actually rename it there as well. I'll show that in a demo. Then what is very useful, or what helps, is to configure as you design. So in the case of the headsets here, I've based all of the ear cup dimensions off of a single sketch. And so as you create, let's say, the revolve to create the sponge, there may be dimensions for that revolve that will change, or dimensions from that sketch that will change to make the sponge thicker or thinner, and adjust the dimensions of the sponge. Add those to the configuration table as you create it. It's just a lot easier to keep track of the things that you want to change, rather than going back later and trying to find it in the configuration, or trying to find it in your timeline to then capture as a configuration or configurable object. And then also test your configurations frequently. Go and switch between configurations to try them out. Okay, so time to jump into a demo. Essentially what I'm going to do here is go into Fusion, just show you what a configured design looks like, and then I'm going to show you just a very basic process on how to start off a configured design and work with the tables. So here's the headphone set that I have had up on there. So on the left hand side, as I mentioned, you've got the drop down that allows you to change between the different configurations. So I can go, there's a entry level, you can see a much smaller speaker, ear cup and speaker design. It's a thinner headband, different color scheme. And if I go to mid-range, the color scheme will change, the speaker size will increase, but the foam itself, still quite thin, maybe not so comfortable, and the headband as well. And then going to Pro, making quite a drastic change to the headband. You'll see there the headband gets wider, gets a cutout, and the foam on the ear muffs, on the ear cups, should I say, is a lot thicker. And the appearance once again changes. So in this case here, we've got the new commands here in the panel across the top. So we've got now a configure panel with two options. We have configure and display configuration table. Essentially, display configuration table will bring up the configuration table and allow you to switch between configurations. And we can also add configurations. So if I wanted to add a fourth configuration here, or maybe two extra configurations, we can put in a value and click add, and that will add in extra configurations. So let's say configuration 4 is actually a Pro model, but in the red dahlia, we can rename that. I'm going to say Pro Red. And once again, you'll see here for the themes, we can go through the themes columns, basically choose the drop down and select which theme we want, or which configuration of that theme we want. So for comfort, we want a plush model, which is going to give us nice thick foam, more comfort, and then we'll change that to red dahlia. So we now can see the model in the background automatically adjusting. So that is what the result would look like. You'd be able to choose from the different themes and adjust the model. But how do we get there? So let's just start a new design. I'm going to do something very basic here. I'm going to start a sketch, and I'm literally just going to do a block. Let's say this, and this is where we rename the parameters. Want the width of the block to be 100 and the height of the block to, let's say, be 200. So put in those dimensions and named them, and then we can extrude that block, and let's say this is depth is equal to 50. So we have a basic block, and we may want to be able to configure this block. Could be that our design gauge blocks, and we want to have various different gauge block options, or grades of gauge block, or sizes of gauge block. So we can create one simple block design. Could even actually go and choose to chamfer essentially all the corners of this. Put a small chamfer on all the corners just to break the edge. And so we've got a couple of options here at the bottom, a couple of features that we can configure. So we would go to the configure icon, and that will open up a empty configuration table. Well, basically we have configuration 1, and we can choose to add multiple configurations. So I'm not going to make this too long. We'll just say we want another 2 configurations. And basically what we can do is we can go to the first configuration and rename it. And so I'm going to go gauge block, and let's say this gauge block is going to be 100 millimeters, so gauge block 100, and we'll just quickly go down gauge block 200, and then maybe just gauge block 300. So we name the configurations. Those would be the 3 configurations available in the drop down. Now, to be able to add what you're actually going to configure, we can add aspects. So I'll click to add aspects. Apologies, yeah, we'll click to add aspects, and it shows you in the timeline what aspects of this design can be configured. So we'll see on the sketch, if I click on the sketch, we have a couple of options here. We can configure everything in the sketch, so suppression and visibility, as well as the dimensions. So we can see there's the width and the height dimension. I want to configure those. Then on the extrusion, the distance, I want to configure the distance of the extrusion as well. And if we really want to, we can set the distance for the chamfer as well. So I'm going to go ahead here and change the height. Let's say that's going to be for the first one 100, 200, and 300, and then maybe the width here will go up in 50 increments, from 50 to 100 to 150, and then we'll keep the depth, let's say, at 50 for all of them, just for the sake of saving time. And then the chamfer, let's increase the chamfer by 0.5 for each one. So as it gets bigger, the chamfer gets bigger as well. So we've chosen the aspects to configure, put them into the configuration table, and we can then essentially switch between the configurations by double clicking on a column, and you will see that it then updates. Now you could still work with equations within your design, and you can apply equations so that you only have to change the width, and the height and the depth change as a mathematical function of the width. That will work as well. You could even input that mathematical function here. So let's say the height, or let's say the width should be half the height. We can then just put in here height divided by 2. And so that will maintain that mathematical function. So let's just get some consistency here, and we'll put it in there. So the width is half the height for all of them. Okay, so you can go through and make those changes and use them as required. You'll see here D5, that is the dimension for the chamfer. I didn't name that dimension, so we can always go here and rename the column, and this is the chamfer width. So we know now what that column actually stands for. So you can rename the column. So now if I had to go back into that chamfer feature and hover over that parameter, we'll see the chamfer W. That is that value we have in there. So from a configuration table perspective, that would be the setup. The information here can be, or the columns can be highlighted, and if you right click on the highlighted columns, you can then choose to move it to a new themed table. And so we can separate information like the, let's say, the overall dimensions. We can move to a theme table, and it drops that down to a themed table, which we can then double click on the header, and we can rename that to, let's say, size. So theme 1 was the 100. So we'll rename that 100 millimeter. And so on. We'll go through those. And so as you adjust the different theme names, you'll see the size. We now have a size theme, and we can adjust, or we can choose from the themes. And then things like the chamfer width, that could be added to a theme. Maybe the theme for that is, you know, how sharp do you want the corners? How big should that be? To include the chamfers or not, potentially could suppress them. But you might have a theme as well for physical appearance and materials. What are these gauge blocks made of? So that would be your configuration table setup. You will see this has two tabs as well, parameters, and we can go over to properties, and you'll see that we have on the property side, we can actually put in a description. So we can put in a description here for each of those gauge blocks. Okay, so that would be your configuration setup. You'll notice that once I clicked on add aspect, we now have configuration, this little configuration option here, almost like your edit in place. We can end configuration mode, that takes us out of configuration mode, and we can basically now go and choose a configuration from the table. Okay, so that would be the process of setting up your configuration. As mentioned, you know, you can get quite advanced with that. You know, jumping back to the headphones set here, you can see there's quite a lot of dimensions changing as the configurations are being changed. Components also being switched on and off. You'll see in this design here for the ear cup, I'll go ahead and suppress or switch the visibility off as we change between a let's say a mid-range or entry level and pro. So I'm going to go back to entry level here. We'll see that the speaker changes out for a different speaker type. Even within the pro range, if I changed out to a 40 millimeter, the speaker is then suppressed and the new one brought back in. So not only are we changing dimensions, but we're also switching out components within the design. Okay, now from a distributed assembly perspective, when you insert a configured part into, or part or subassembly into your design, you are prompted to choose a configuration. So we can see here, I created a headphone stand. It is a configured design. You can actually see the icon there shows two little arrows, one going backwards, one going forwards, showing that you have configurations that you can switch out. So when inserting the headphone stand into a new design, or inserting it into the current design, you can choose then between the tall, medium, and short headphone stand. And it actually shows you, in this case, the configuration setter. So the tall has three, well, these configurations have three parameters that are being changed. So we can actually see the difference in those parameters when choosing from the configuration. So you would pull your parts in, choose the configuration that would be your base configuration for your design, and that can then be changed once a configuration table is created. So we insert the configure parts or sub-assemblies, choose which configuration to insert. That configuration can be changed later, and then you can also create the configuration table in your distributed assembly to change out configurations for those components that are linked in. So here we can see the configuration table. What I've done here in this table, we've got, let's say, a package. It's the headphones plus a stand that is included. And so the Pro package has the tall headphone stand, where it has the Pro model headphones. So we're choosing the configuration of the stand and the configuration of the headphones. The three after this, the position, in this case, it's just a captured position to adjust where the headphones are in relation to the stand. As the height of the stand's changing, this is just changing the height of the headphones rather than using a joint. And so you're able to change that out. So just a quick demo on that. If I go back here, we'll see the headphone stand itself. You can change between tall, medium, and short. And this one switches out quite quickly. We've only got the 3 dimensions being changed. And if I go to configure, we can see there we've got height, base, and width, those 3 parameters being changed per configuration. In this case, very simple, no need for themed tables unless we are going to change things like adding extra accessories, changing colors, changing material. We could then separate out to themed tables. So quite a basic one here. So we have the headphone that's configured, the headphone stand that's configured, and then within the assembly, we have the 2 distributed components, the stand and the headphones themselves. And within the configuration table, as mentioned, we can create a configuration. So there's the Pro package that comes with the tall headphone stand, but we could switch it out to the medium if required. You'll see then that the position here is not correct for the medium, so we'll go and put it in the medium position, and that's just adjusting a direct edit to move the headphone to the correct location. So I'll go ahead and move that back, and we can adjust between configurations in the table, or in the browser you can click the drop down and you can choose the different package you want. So that's how your distributed design would work. For larger assemblies, I would probably favor this process, because as you switch between configurations, there's less information being changed at the main assembly level. So you're changing between sort of smaller predefined configurations. It also makes the configuration tables and theme tables a lot less cluttered if you can break it down into the individual. So like we look at the headphone stand, you know, it's a very basic table here. There's not a lot of information required. So by having this as an external component, we can reduce down the complexity of the configuration table for the component. I could have done that with the headphones, done the ear cups separately as one configurable part on its own, and then in that case here the speaker size theme table essentially would not have been here. It could have been in the sub assembly for that ear cup on its own. So various ways in which the design could have worked, or should I say, sorry, speaker size and comfort, those two would have been completely separate inside of the ear cup itself. So we would have reduced the number of required theme tables in this design. So just think about that. Think about the process and how you would achieve what you need to, and maybe simplified down sub-assemblies or potential sub-assemblies can be configured separately, then brought in on a distributed design. Okay, so moving on, how can configurations be used outside of the design environment? So how do we leverage these configurations? And this slide specifically looks at drawings. Essentially, when you create a drawing, you can choose the configuration that you want to use within that drawing. So we'll see here, the configuration is set to Pro, and that would create a new drawing. If you then want to create a new sheet or add another view from the Pro configuration, we can add that to the new drawing. If we want to add, or if we then change the configuration to, let's say, entry level, we cannot add an entry level configuration to the existing Pro drawing. It would be a separate drawing. We would not be able to see it in the drawing drop-down list. So that's the one thing that I did notice, but we'll have a look within the drawing what we can do once a drawing is created. But from the configuration perspective, when creating a drawing, it would create it as, let's say, 3 separate drawings from scratch. But once a drawing is created, we can switch between configurations within the drawing. So your process here typically would be then to select a drawing, select a configuration, to create the drawing for. So in this case, the Pro configuration. Create your views and dimensions as required. And if you need to, you can then within the drawing switch configurations. And as far as possible, dimensions and notes are kept. If there is geometry that is suppressed, any dimensions or notes that are added to that geometry is lost, and unfortunately they do not come back when switching back to another configuration. So in the case of the Pro headset that has the vent in the top of the headband, that vent is suppressed for the narrower headband. So we'll see in the drawing, when we switch from Pro to entry back to Pro, we lose any dimensions and notes added to the vent itself. So the way I see this workflow happening is you would dimension out and basically create your drawing for your most complex configuration. You can then duplicate or save that drawing as, and then change your configuration out to a simpler configuration. You will lose any of the dimensions you don't need, but the dimensions that are left behind in the model can stay, and you can then add any extra notes or dimensions if required. Now, I mentioned once you have created the drawing, you can still switch the configuration. You'll see here in the drawing browser, if you right click on the assembly or the main sort of part node, you will see there's an option there to switch configuration. That brings up the configuration dialog box, and then you can choose which configuration you want to switch to for that drawing. And the drawing, all the views in the drawing will update, and the dimensions, as long as the surfaces haven't or edges haven't changed or disappeared, the dimensions will typically stay linked in the drawing. We will get to a demo of that once we've gone through the different workspaces. So, looking at leveraging configurations in renders, what I found nice here was I could set up my render environment, lock the view, and render out a image. And while the view is still locked and render is still locked, let's say I reach the end of that render, I save the render, I can then use the configuration option just to switch to the next configuration and continue rendering. And so you can get like this, in this case here, these two images rendered out. The light is from the same direction, the reflections are on the same in the same place. There's no change in the view or perspective for the render, it's just the model that changes. And so from a rendering perspective, it just helps keep a little bit of helps with that repetition of creating the renders. You can also use the views as well, but you're not changing and managing multiple models to be able to achieve this. From a simulation perspective, you essentially each time you change your configuration, each configuration will essentially have its own simulation. So I've got your independent simulation per configuration. So as you change from one configuration to another, you will see that your entire simulation setup will change and it's specific per configuration. From the manufacturing environment, we can leverage configurations in the manufacturing environment as well. So here we see we can create toolpaths from a certain configuration. So on the left-hand side, I've got the Pro configuration set up and the toolpaths set up accordingly. Then when you change your configuration, those toolpaths, because the geometry has changed, those toolpaths would then be required to update and you can then run the new toolpath. So depending on how you set up your toolpaths, this can be quite easy just to regenerate the toolpath, output the NC file and continue with that. And you can switch and change between the different configurations, regenerate toolpaths and output your programs. And there are a few more environments where you can leverage this, but I'm not going to go through all of it. It's going to make the presentation too long. What I'm going to do here is just jump into a quick demo, just to show you one or two things here. So we have the headphone drawing, and as mentioned, if I go ahead and add, let's say, a note to some geometry here. So this is event. Let's say on the Pro model. So we have that note. You'll see I've got some other dimensions, the ear cup diameter, the length of the little mounting stems, the angle between the ear cups, thickness of the foam. We've got different views, and what we can do then, once a drawing is created, you are able to switch between configurations. So I'll go here, there's the Pro V4 configuration, switch configuration. You do get a warning letting you know what's going to happen with the updates of the views. You click OK there, and then we can change to mid-range. We'll double click on mid-range, and you can see that all the views update. We get the updated design. We can see that the vent disappears, but the note also disappeared. We've got the dimension here for the thickness, and so now we get that updated drawing. If I change back to the Pro model, unfortunately that note is gone. So my thoughts on this is that you would do your initial drawing, add all the required information, and then you can do a save as and save a copy for the next configuration. In that copy, you can then switch to another configuration and update it as required. It just saves you starting each drawing from scratch, and it's easy to switch out the model within the drawing. So that's from a drawing perspective. If I go back to the actual headphones themselves, we will see here in the simulation environment, you also get the same drop down. So we've got, now it's updated, we've got entry level, mid-range, Pro. So here on the Pro model, we can see loads. We don't have any loads applied yet. And if I go into materials, we can see that there are materials that have not been assigned. Changing back to the entry level, the model will update, and you can see there now we've got the entry level, and we now have a force applied to the top of the headset. And so, with the materials, we've got the materials applied as well, ABS plastic and so on. So each configuration has its own simulation, its own independent simulation. And then same with the render. When we go to render, we can go and change between entry level, mid-range and Pro, and have that simulation, have that render update, the configuration update, should I say. So there's the Pro in the carbon black, and then the Pro red. Oh, see, I've got a little bit of a issue showing up here, so that I'd have to just see what's going on there. But go back to the Pro. And there we've got the Pro model. So in the render environment, you can quite easily change between that. And then lastly, if we just go to manufacture, just to show what that looks like, I've isolated a single component here. This is the Pro model sort of speaker mounting plate. It's very basic geometry here. We've got a couple of tool paths. And if we change from Pro to, let's say, the entry level, which was a smaller speaker, the geometry here will update. We can see that it's much smaller. And with the toolpaths, we can quite quickly regenerate the toolpaths, and they are now regenerated for the smaller geometry. Okay, so from a leverage point of the configurable or configurations, should I say, you're able to go into the different environments, different workspaces, and switch between the different configurations and have your geometry or have your information related to them update or update them as required. Quite a quick and easy way to carry setups across from one model to another. Essentially, it's just the geometry changing, not the actual part that's being machined in this case. Okay, and that brings us to our summary for this. So essentially what configurations allows you to do is it allows you to create a design that easily changes between the different design configurations that are available. You pre-design how your object is, or your product that you sell can be configured, and you can then quite easily chop and change between those configurations to suit the customer's requirements or to suit your manufacturing requirements. And because all of this is done within a single file, it does reduce the clutter. Now I say single file, we can take one file and update that, like we saw with the headphones, and create basically 3 different models of the same headphone. And so that reduces the file clutter. There's no need to create 3 separate assemblies of that same design. Once again, you can also make a change on the design, like add a fillet or a chamfer or a hole that carries across through all 3 configurations, so that when you design, you can design and have all 3 configurations update as you make the design. Whereas if you had 3 models for the headphone and you need to add a hole somewhere for a microphone, you'd have to go to each individual file and update and make that change on each one. So in that way it reduces file clutter as well, and it makes it easier to customize parts and assemblies, because we can basically go to the drop down or to the table and fill in information as required within that table. And it's much easier to understand format than trying to go into sketches and features and edit and change within the sketches and features. Lastly, that the configurations can be leveraged in multiple workspaces, so it can make the workflow for other workspaces a lot easier as well. Once again, reducing a bit of clutter as well in the process. And this is a progressive rollout of the functionality. So, what we've seen here is just the start. Autodesk will continue to work and improve and roll out more functionality. So, expect more to come within this environment. And yeah, from a summary perspective, that's all I've got for this webinar. Once again, configurations just allows you a lot more flexibility within your design, whether it's a multi-body design or a distributed design. Just gives you a lot more flexibility within Fusion from a design perspective. And with that being said, we're going to go over to Q&A. I have been keeping an eye on the chat. I haven't seen any questions come through on the chat. Just having a quick look now to see if there is anything else that's coming through. I'll give a minute just to see if any questions do come through on the chat. Okay, so there's no questions that have come through on the live chat, so I'm going to go ahead and close off the webinar. I'd like to thank you for your attendance if you attended the live webinar, and if you have watched the recording, thank you so much for watching the recording. Please feel free to make contact with us. My email address is on the recording, and we'll see now that let's just get this skipping on. This was brought to you by Autodesk and Micrographics, but here we go. We've got the Micrographics website and email address bottom left there on the slide. And I'd like to thank you for watching, and if you did enjoy this webinar and you want to watch more webinars similar to this or webinars relating to other Autodesk products within the manufacturing or architectural workspaces, then feel free to go to our channel and have a look at our recordings on our channel. We upload short videos on tips and tricks, as well as longer webinars on specific topics like we did today. And please, if you enjoy this, don't forget to once again like and subscribe, and then also if you want notifications, click on notifications for any future webinars that may be coming up. Thank you and goodbye.